Here in Nigeria, there's growing concern about the emergence of a new insurgent group known as the Lakurawas, which has been operating in the northwest region of the country. The authorities say the group originated from the Sahel region, particularly Mali and Niger. They say the group infiltrated Sokoto and Kebbi states in Nigeria's northwest region after last July's coup in Niger disrupted joint military patrols along the Nigerian border. It's not clear whether the group has any jihadist ideology or if they've carried out any major attacks yet, but there are reports that the group has been collecting cows from local people in exchange for some form of protection. Analysts say the emergence of the Lakurawas group signals a growing threat in northwest Nigeria, which is already challenged by the presence of armed gangs known as bandits and kidnappings for ransom. Well, for more on the latest security assessment, I'm joined now in the studio by the international security analyst, certified anti-terrorism specialist, and Africa representative of the Anti-Terrorism Accreditation Board, David Otto. Good to see you, David. Thank you very much indeed for coming in. What do we know so far about this new insurgent group that are calling themselves the Lakurawas?
Yes, Charles, as you said in the intro, I've spoken to some sources on ground just to get an understanding of where this group is coming from, what the structure is. What they're saying is that this group has been existing for the past 5 years. Others say it's been there since 2012.
You mean in Nigeria?
In Nigeria.
Right.
And then, of course, it goes back to 1997, existing in Mali. Where some of these, armed groups were fighting against the Tuaregs. But within the Nigerian context, what I've been able to gather from sources is that these groups, were brought in by locals to assist them to fight against bandits, the armed gangs,
So they were hired as mercenaries?
Yes, they were hired as mercenaries
right.
To come and do that. Now, once they succeeded in doing that, of course, the local population welcomed them, gave them a space to, hibernate, within the country. Meanwhile, the same group was, traveling along the Sokoto, Kebbi axis, towards Niger Republic, to also engage in mercenary activity. So it has been existing for some time. But the reason why we're now talking about this group at this point in time is everything. Everything is about timing. Is because now the group is emerging to, institute Sharia law, asking women to wear hijab, asking men to wear very short trousers, and taking zakat or what you said, cows from businessmen as a payback. So they are becoming more sophisticated, and this has now become an issue because the locals are now saying, this is not what we expected, but it has been existing. I mean, the truth is that with every terrorist organization, once you fail to occupy the triangle, which is you fail to protect the population as a government, once you fail to employ young people, when you fail to protect your borders, and of course you give an opportunity for these groups to penetrate, this is where they exploit. So as the case it is, Charles, is that they are now recruiting young people, and that's why they call them the Lakurawas, because effectively it means, the recruiters. They're recruiting young people, allegedly paying them, up close to ₦1 million. We don't know if it's a month or a year, that's not quite clear, but they are paying them, which means, there is a fertile ground, considering the economy, considering the state of affairs, that young people have been recruited. And,
but what are they recruiting them for? I mean, are they recruiting them to form a paramilitary organization? I mean, you're calling them a terror group. Should we be worried about this development?
I think, first of all, in order for them to become a terror group, of course, the government has made it very clear that bandits are terrorists. Therefore, even if they are bandits, which of course they claim not to be bandits,
right.
They're saying that they are fighting against bandits within the West and North Central, the government may have to still designate them as a terrorist organization, which they haven't done at this point in time. They've been identified as having characteristics of a terrorist organization. So at this point in time, I think what the government needs to do is to nip it in the bud. But this group has been there, Charles, as I mentioned, for over 5 years. If you want to consider, the closest figure that we have, some say since 2018, others say since 2012. But the crucial worry, Charles, is that this is a group that now has links to, according to sources, Al-Qaeda. It's got links to ISIS, that's the Islamic State of the Greater Sahel. It's got links to other local bandits. So
it's got a footprint in Nigeria.
And it's got a footprint in Nigeria, with mostly foreign fighters composing the core of this group. But what we don't know yet is who is actually leading the group. So there's no clear leadership.
Right. So I mean, who or what? I mean, you've mentioned that local people brought them in. It just sounds very murky at the moment, but who or what should we blame for the emergence of yet another terror group in Nigeria? Is it a failure of intelligence, the lack of community policing, or a combination of everything?
I think it's a combination of everything. As I mentioned earlier, I often describe terrorism in a triangle of three, the terror triangle, and I say often that the motivational factors are quite key. So you've got to look at the role that the government plays in actually curbing on high level of employment, and also dealing with insecurity within local communities. Because as a result of the insecurity, these so-called mercenaries were brought in to protect the local population. Intelligence comes in at the point at which there is a failure to protect the people, and then there is a failure for the government to say, well, if you're calling in mercenaries, we are able to, take that occupy that vacuum. That vacuum must be occupied. But what the government has failed to do, or what the security agencies have failed to do until as we speak, is to occupy that vacuum. And now, of course, the Nigerian army has, established, a very powerful forward operating military base in Zamfara, which perhaps, as the new, chief of army staff, who is standing for the late Chief of Army Staff, may so rest in peace, has established a forward operating base. Let's see how that, is going to pan out. But that is a reactive strategy, Charles. I think what we were thinking, in terms of when you're looking at this kind of situations, is how do you stop them from happening, which is where intelligence comes in. There has been a failure of intelligence because groups metamorphose from one level to the other. Where was the military? Where was the intelligence services? Where was the police? Where were the locals? Where were the local authorities when the group became what it is as we speak? Yeah.
And I mean, have any specific attacks been linked to this group, the Lakurawas, yet? I mean, I know you mentioned cows being sort of taken as payment from local people, but have there been no sort of, over those 5 years that you're talking about, any specific terror attacks that have been linked to them?
Yes, so when you look at when you define terror attacks, from a government perspective, it's either attacks against civilians, which is soft, targets, or attacks against military, which is hard targets. We haven't seen any attack that has been
the reason I'm asking you that, I'm sorry to interrupt you, is that you said that locals brought them in to protect them.
This is what I'm
So
I'm
they
coming
would have
at.
been fighting.
This is what I'm coming at.
The terror group.
Yes, so that's why I said, when it comes to, when you're looking at terrorism as, from a government perspective, the attacks that count are the attacks against civilians and attacks against hard military targets. Now, if you're talking about attacks against other bandits or other armed groups, then you don't really count that because those are also non-state actors that the government wants to get rid of anyway. So we don't count those attacks as attacks launched by that group. What we count in is attacks that are either launched against civilians or military.
So could you call them vigilantes to the extent that they were there to protect villagers?
Yes, so you could call them vigilantes, but vigilantes to the extent that the villagers do want them to be there. But at this point in time, it does appear as if they've outgrown the beast has outgrown
they've basically outstayed their welcome.
And so initially, yes, you could call them vigilantes, you could call them mercenaries, but as we speak, they are showing signs of an Al-Qaeda-like, an ISIS movement, which of course it's a bad example of a crime terror movement.
Absolutely. And Nigeria, of course, facing significant security challenges. I mean, this now potentially another one. What needs to be done urgently from your experiential perspective?
I think one of the problems that the Nigerian security architecture has is, it is viewed as weak by non-state actors. So you have any kind of group, to put it that way, believing and succeeding in setting up shop, within the country and operating successfully. That is something which the national security of the nation has to rethink, in terms of its repetition by non-state actors. You can't have a non-state actor coming from a foreign country with foreign mercenaries, and then, of course, taking territory and controlling locals that are Nigerians. So that is a critical point. Now, in terms of how the Nigerian government is going to look at this or deal with this, it still comes down to the fact that the Nigerian government has to take control of the terror triangle. They've got to be able to provide the security that is required by the people, provide employment. They call them the Lakurawas. Why? Because they recruit from the local population, which means they are actually exploiting the role that the government is supposed to play in.
And do we know how big they are, how many they are?
Well, in terms of numbers, we haven't actually looked at the current figures of the group, but I understand that it's more than 300 strong fighters, but they keep changing these fighters.
Right. Well, that's not too much of a significant number.
It is not, but
right.
One jihadist can cause a mayhem, and 300 is a national security threat.
David, thank you very much indeed. David Otto is an international security analyst, certified anti-terrorism specialist, and Africa representative of the Anti-Terrorism Accreditation Board.